Each semester, the UCLA Committee on Public Lectures presents a series of lectures, usually with some central theme, which are delivered by members of the faculty. Tonight we begin the second lecture in our introspective series, The University, A View from Within, which is entitled Artistic Creativity Within the University. Are scholarship and creativity compatible? A different question might be asked, are scholars and creative artists compatible? Do they live together peacefully in the same university department? The musicologist, the scholar of the history of art and of the theater, may find a natural home in the university, but what about the creative artist who might not be a scholar? Does the scholarly approach stifle creativity in the arts? What role in the educative process do creative artists play? What is the difference between a university and a conservatory? Is the university necessary for the creative artist and the creative artist necessary to the university? Our speaker tonight is known to hold strong views on such subjects. Dr. Roy Harris is an eminent composer who brings not only the viewpoint of the creative artist, but also a familiarity with the interaction between the musical and university cultures. He has been on the faculty at a university since 1941. Dr. Harris has received the Honorary Doctor of Music from Rutgers University in 1941 and the University of Rochester in 1946. He has written 10 symphonies, the 8th, 9th, and 10th of which were written right here in residence. And the 8th came at the 50th anniversary of the San Francisco Symphony. The 9th was commissioned by the Philadelphia Philharmonic Orchestra. The 10th was premiered at UCLA to commemorate the 100th year of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And in addition, string quartets, string and piano quintets, choral compositions, and piano solos. He has some additional academic qualifications that are of interest in view of the topic tonight. He was appointed a Guggenheim Fellow in the years 1928, 29, and 30. He has been a composer in residence at Cornell University, 1941 and 2, in Colorado College, Colorado Springs. I won't bother with the years. Utah State Agricultural College, Indiana University, and then came to UCLA in 1961. He has served as musical director with the Office of War Information in 1945, and he's received numerous awards and honors. He's received first honors for the most important score, the Folk Song Symphony, in 1940 by the Committee for Appreciation of American Music. He's received the Certificate of Honor for Outstanding Contributions to American Music by the National Association for Composers and Conductors in 1940. The Coolidge Medal for Eminent Contribution to Chamber Music by the Library of Congress in 1942. He's the author of numerous articles and has been elected Fellow of the National Institute of Arts and Letters. His manuscripts are preserved in the archives of the Library of Congress. Most important, he has enriched the world by composing 130 modern chamber music, orchestral, and choral works. And it is my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Roy Harris.
It's nice to be in a university which is so secure that they invite evaluations from their own employees. I think that before talking about these gargantuan subjects, the scholar and the creative artist, and the behemoth, the university, we should think a little bit of how contradictory man has been, how very often people start out to do one thing and end up doing another. This is a history of mankind, as a matter of fact. I'm thinking now of the mystics who felt that in the Middle Ages that God was within themselves, and who felt that in order to become better acquainted with God, they should dig a hole in the ground and live there until they got blind and lost their minds. I'm thinking about the contrary of that, for instance, St. Francis of Assisi, who felt that God was everywhere, and so he became a friend of the birds and beasts. We can think only in the transcendental group, for instance, in our own short span of civilization, the difference between Whitman and Thoreau. Thoreau, who was really a pantheist, who felt that he found truth in nature. Whitman, who was really deeply social in all of his thinking and referred his thought always to mankind. We can remember, for instance, the time in history when there were religious wars. People started out with the idea that God was love. They had to understand love, and in order to absolutely imprint their conception of love on the world, they had wars and killed each other. Mankind is full of this sort of thing. And so I felt, after I had written a lecture for you and read it over, that perhaps I had better reconsider. When I read it over to myself, it seemed to me sort of a think piece. I had written a think piece, and it's here. And when I want to dramatize some of the things which have happened and which I consider to be true, or have certain aspects of truth, anyhow, from my viewpoint, I shall read from it. And when I have something that I think is pertinent to the matter at hand, then I may just talk to you. Now, to begin with, I thought it might be a good idea to just speak about the beginning of man and his long trek toward civilization, the creative artist and the creative thinker. They were inseparable in the beginning. In fact, they were one and the same man in the beginning. And together they led Homo sapiens out of the caves of darkness and clothed and fed him, taught him how to use memory with language, art symbols and rituals, preserved his image and traditions, awakened his wonderment and stimulated his imagination for new desires, expectations, and vague premonitions from within. Now this little paragraph represents 25,000 generations as we reckon time. That is about 500,000 years. It's very interesting how we reckon time. We reckon everything in the relationship of ourselves to the earth that we live on. For instance, we reckon time by how the sun comes around to meet us. Our forebears used to think that the sun revolved around us. We've since then come to the conclusion that we revolve in such a way that the sun hits us at various times every 24 hours, and so we reckon time that way according to light. Well, can you imagine, since the planet that we live on, and so the astronomers tell us, is such a tiny planet, can you imagine how time is such a small consideration in the universe as well as space? Our reckoning of time is not only humanistic It belongs to human beings. It's humans' idea. But every single thing that we have in education, every single thing that we think or believe is a result of human thought. And we assume it because we thought it, that it is true in a universal world, and it may not be true at all, of course. Now, this may be a disturbing thought to you, or it may make you sort of feel like you'd like to kick your heels in the air and say, well, I don't have to be nearly as diligent as I thought I had to be. All I have to do is just sort of get along somehow until the old man with the sickle comes along and takes me somewhere. I don't know where. I think it's well for us to remember in this talk that we have together here that all of our thoughts, and I'm repeating this, I want to emphasize it, every single thing that we think is humanistic. Even the measurements, even the tools that made the measurements were our conceptions. So I shall continue. As mankind became more interested and perceptive in the world around him, the creative artist and the creative thinker went their separate ways. The creative thinker looked outward for concrete facts. He became a measurement man. The creative artist looked inward for revelations. There he discovered that he understood much about which he knew nothing. He leaped over generations of experience into new vistas of understanding. We of today know about these matters also. We have given them learned names such as intuitions and extrasensory perceptions. This period represents another 10,000 generations, about 200,000 years. I keep bringing up this time problem because it will be pertinent a little bit later on. I think that it would be a good idea here to talk about memory and reason, because mankind was beginning to reason from his memory. Rather recently, I sat by the bedside of a friend who was gradually deteriorating, and he could talk, but he couldn't make sentences. And he said slowly, "I can think, but I cannot remember." He couldn't put the words together because he had lost the memory of putting them together. This memory of mankind has been very, very important in bringing you and me together here today over the generations of our forebears. I think of another story, which is a rather amusing one. In 1898, the year when I was born, a very learned committee in Cornell University gave a doctor's degree to a man for proving conclusively that no vehicle could ever be propelled through the air. Well, now, we laugh and think, well, how stupid. But you see, there was only one factor left out there. They knew, for instance, that the materials out of which aircraft were made wouldn't float in the air. But they had failed to put together the idea, for instance, that when a cyclone came, whole trees and houses were born in the air. They forgot about that factor, and this was part of race experience. They all knew about it, but they hadn't figured out that there is a direct ratio in how much weight can stay in air according to the speed with which it's moving. They hadn't figured that one out for some reason or another. I'll never understand how. It seems so obvious to us now, doesn't it? Well, now you see it's very simple to turn that over. The air doesn't have to be heavy, or does the air have to move fast? The vehicle can move fast. The speed has to be there, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the air which is moving fast. There just has to be fast motion. And so this business of reasoning is something which is gradually developing us in many directions. it's quite interesting that in mankind development, the reasoning part generally has been related to materialistic things, things which could be measured, things which could be not only measured but examined and put down into the thought processes of mankind. Now, the humanistic matters are not so measurable, and I'm going to come to that a little bit later on. But I would like to have you keep these two different categories separated in your mind. There's a very great difference between the measurement man and the creative artist. They are both creative thinkers. They are both terribly important in the development of civilization, but they are quite different in many ways. At this point of evolution, the measurement man was sorely handicapped. What tools he had made were crude and inaccurate, and moreover, he had no symbols with which to record and ponder his measurements. Meanwhile, his artistic brother was having great success with dances, chants, war paint, ritualistic forms, and props. The creative artist far outstripped the measurement man because he found his subjective materials all ready to be used within himself. He had only to create suitable forms from the fecundity of his fertile imagination. But slowly and surely the measurement man taught himself how to observe and think and learn to use the finite world of his choice. Then, too, the creative artist and the measurement man were often two coordinated parts of the same brain. When this partnership arrived at exciting conclusions, things began to happen. Just think for a minute how exciting, how exhilarating the experience was when somebody discovered the principle of the wheel. That by making something round, it could take up a certain amount of space and return on itself all the time and cover that space and always be still. This was one of the greatest, one of the most important discoveries in all civilization. The development of the wheel, it seems so simple to us now, but it's a tremendously important principle, how to bring motion into one place and still keep motion. This was a tremendous idea of development, which was a sort of subjective thing. He didn't get that by measuring it. He got it by a sudden inspiration. And this is the thing which is so important. If we're going to go forward, we have to not only think in crystallized idioms which have been already packaged and handed over to us, we have to think. We have to think, not memorize. Memorizing is not education. Learning how to think is education. There's a tremendous difference. There's a difference between the scholar and the creative thinker, which I'm going to come to a little bit later. Rather quickly as time is reckoned, the creative instincts of the measurement man translated facts into figures. This was a tremendous development in itself. Something weighs so much. He can write it down. He can refer to it. He can remember it. It's something he can compute, you see. The translation of facts into figures was a very, very important step forward in the whole development of civilization. He soon became the good genie of reality, creating new man-made worlds. Wherever he went, he transformed the specter of hunger into a heaping horn of plenty. He transformed winter's blast into a gentle zephyr of spring. He turned night into day, shrank space, multiplied time, captured and transformed energy. He named himself scientist, he who knows. Only the quixotic spirit of man eluded the scientist's inquisitive brain. The creative artist has given the scientist a merry chase. To attempt the measurement of a creative impulse is like trying to take the temperature of a hot or cold reaction, or the pulse rate of a thought, or trying to measure the size of a perception which instantaneously expands from nothing to encompass all time and all space, or trying to balance the weight between religious ecstasy and flaming anger. The creative artist cannot measure the macrocosm or the microcosm of his environment, but he can feel and understand the emotional impact of his environment upon his life. And often he can create new cultural symbols that characterize that impact, which may establish new values of perception and conception. This is the unique value of the creative artist. By expressing perception patterns from abstract reactions, he substantiates realities which never existed. I'm going to repeat that because I think it's a thought I'd like to sew a button on. By expressing perception patterns from abstract reactions, he substantiates realities which never existed. Thus, he expands the horizons of man's awareness. For instance, mankind during the war, in England and France I know of especially because they were our allies, suffered under a tremendous psychosis of fear, which hovered over them always. The only thing which seemed to be able to allay this fear was the emotional reaction which they got from great music. So that we had fine performers warming their hands in the wintertime in cathedrals to get them warm enough to play the organ. We had English musicians in the subways of London, people gathering together to take this subjective thing which a Beethoven long ago might have projected. Beethoven, who himself belonged to the group that was attacking England, taking his music and giving it strength. The whole the reversion and the reverting of the process of something which projected something to take this back and arouse something inside of itself. These are terribly important contributions to civilization. I speak more about music because I don't know about the other arts, but by no means have the idea, I want none of you to have the idea that I don't feel the other arts are similarly important in developing the whole civilization process. Thus, the creative artist has created language, logic, philosophy, religion, music, dance, the visual arts, architecture, along with the ornaments and amenities of human intercourse. Now, I realize this is a much too concentrated survey of what happened in thousands of generations of struggle for individual and collective survival. But it suggests the peaks and troughs of the gradual emergence of human consciousness as we know it. All cultural development was primarily biological, having little to do with strong character of high purpose. But the upsurge of man has been persistent and consequential. It separates man as a new variation from other species of animal life. It may even portend universal perception. If the emergence of the measurement man, the creative thinker, research scientist, and creative artist is a unique growth in evolution, fresh evidence that mankind bears a unique kinship to universal intelligence, then indeed the academic scholar was necessary as an assistant and collaborator of the creative thinker, and education was instinctively developed for the cultivation and cross-pollination of knowledge. I want here to comment now. We've come up to the modern man. I wrote down comments which I have heard about the modern man, and I must say I agree with quite a few of them. The modern man is fast losing his identity. He lives vicariously and by proxy. He gets milk from a bottle, water from a tap, fruit from a can, opinions from mass media, highly organized, standardized, and prepackaged. His labor is piecemeal and mechanical. Strangers made his home, too hot in winter and too cold in summer. Clothes, transportation, even his relaxation. Days and nights of his years are calibrated into 30-minute periods. Poor man, poor you, and poor me. A formula comes out of this. The automatic machine depersonalizing of human enterprise, depreciation of human energy and thinking capacities. Result, man substitutes machine for man. The irony of the whole situation is that mechanized production was supposed to give us more time to really live. Saving grace is we're either too dumb or too busy to think about it. Probably experience will teach mankind that standardization is only desirable for industry, not for total civilization. If so, the next big push in civilization will be a search to rescue individuality from the clutches of standardized industrialization. There's a story, which is a fascinating story, about a janitor in one of the big eastern cities, I think it was Baltimore, who was told when he came to work to go over across the alley and clean up a basement. So he went over there and worked all day, and nobody said anything to him about it, but he cleaned up the basement of a competitor. Now, of course, this was a kind of lost identity that happened there, and we all tend to have a lost identity. I thought it would be well to talk about that because now we're going into serious matter of the scholar. If we would understand the scholar, we must respect his caution, heed his judicial judgments, and preserve them as wisdom distilled from generations of trial and error. The scholar is as necessary to the university as the library wherein he is most of the time, and where he is most at home, at least. The calm caution and well-ordered consistency of the scholar confirms the university in the necessity for international intercentury perspectives as a system of measurements for fresh contemporary thought and experiment. The scholar is a safety valve, the good father of veneration. His value as the canonized magistrate of usable knowledge is long and deeply established. And since he does not originate knowledge, he can be impartially generous in judging it. He can also easily and quickly abandon such incomplete data, principles, and procedures as have been found unuseful. Thus, the scholar is both the banker and broker of knowledge, the stabilizer and support of education. If we would understand the creative artist, we must love him for his talents and relentless courage to follow his star to rainbow's end, that he may bring back exotic fruits and precious gifts to lay upon the altar of our own unawareness. But the creative artist is a quick decision action man. The quality and quantity of his creativity is determined by his ability to make decisions about the form and content of his creative work. He is therefore by nature and training an autodidact. The great artist has much in common with the stellar athlete. The life habit of both is to think and do, swiftly, concisely, and effectively. To act has become a necessity for them. He who hesitates is lost. If we would understand the university, we must believe it in and serve its dedication to bewildered and undisciplined youth as mankind's greatest natural resource. We must believe beyond the shadow of a doubt that each new generation is mankind's stake in his own future, freshly born to carry on the unfulfilled aspirations and rectify our dismal mistakes. We must realize, however, that the convolutions of change have erupted within the university. We must realize that the university was a very late development in civilization. The university is a babe in the arms compared to the creative thinker and creative artist. This great, enormous corporation, which we call the university, is only 1,000 years old. Think what it will be 50,000 years from now. Or will it be an adjunct to the humanistic branch of the government? Educators may be aware of the university as a status symbol, share its prestige, and count on its budget. We may realize that the university is a trusteeship, empowered with the people's mandate to uphold truth and instill youth with learning and the cultural perspectives of their civilization. We also know that the university bears the public image of curator of knowledge, truth, and wisdom. But we cannot testify to this faith as the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We cannot do this because we are painfully aware that expediency has converted higher education into big business, primarily concerned with volume distribution, serving the constantly expanding student population. We have observed year by year, little by little, the university yielding to the demands of its consumer public. We have become aware that as the university accepted and incorporated greater property, stronger power, and more prestige, it was obliged to relinquish more and more control and demand less and less autonomy. This development is part of the law of balance. People and institutions tend to develop the weaknesses which complement their strengths. If a man has a very, very strong personality, he may not be very empathetic. If he is a sweetheart, he may not have very much strength. So these things tend in nature to balance, and they are in the process of balancing our university from week to week and month to month and year to year. Only today I read in our Daily Bruin that there was great consternation on Mount Olympus about the fact that numbers are beginning to somewhat undermine our standards, and we must do something about it. I imagine you all read that too, and if you were a fine student, you were very happy, and if you aren't, you weren't. So in attempting to serve the growing demands of the average populace, the university has gradually become a well-stocked emporium, offering the greatest catholicity of tastes for the least common denominator of learning potential. The university must accept the fact that all American citizens have a constitutional right to an education. Everybody is as good as everybody else. Indeed, somewhat better. Veritas ad veritatem. So the university must attempt to be all things to all people. For the student body, faculty, and alumni, a sports arena. which incidentally has developed into a proving ground and showcase for professional athletes with scholarships attached. Let me not give you the impression that I'm not for this. I love to watch these games if they're good games. I wouldn't be surprised, and the sports program may do more good with these sort of sport jags every weekend than our psychology department might be doing for our faculty and student body. Kind of releasing the pressure a little bit, you know, and beating your neighbor on the back, and he doesn't mind it. A laboratory for research scientists, absorbed in measurements of the Earth in its astral orbit, even contemplating the project of destroying this old planet altogether. A wind tunnel for space machines. I think they have that up in Stanford, if I'm not mistaken. A workshop for basket weaving, cake baking, and fancy needlework, along with folk singing and dancing. A studio and platform for creative artists of all persuasions, practices, and ambitions, from accomplished artists to pushy amateurs of little talent and less discipline. Research centers for every aspect of materialistic ease and all manifestations of human dis-ease. Institute for the computing of facts and figures of production, distribution, and consumption, public relations, political economy, transportation and communication. In short, a clearinghouse for all idioms of thought, a mentor for the gifted and the poorly endowed alike. The university has been an accomplice to modern man's strange obsession for mass education, which is predicated on a set of half-truths and misconceptions. Goes something like this. Wisdom is the fruit of knowledge. Knowledge can be taught. All people desire wisdom, and therefore all people desire knowledge. Therefore all people must be taught. But common sense tells us, if we will permit, that knowledge does not guarantee wisdom. Many people are educated beyond their intelligence. Moreover, knowledge can only be imparted to those who are gifted for it and who greatly desire it by those who understand and deeply desire to share it. Of course, by no means do all people desire knowledge. Any teacher in any category can testify to this devastating and dismal realization. I have a little story here which really tickled me when I heard it. Josquin de Prez was a very great composer of the 16th century, a Netherlands composer. And a sweet little girl asked one of our professors here, who was that composer whose name began with J? You know, that Neanderthal man. Where ignorance is bliss, it is folly to be wise. But since all people must be taught, we must legislate them into the proper frame of mind. Consequently, mass education becomes the architect, magistrate, and warden of standardized wisdom. It is patently obvious that the university complex is by no means realizing its optimum maximum of opportunity, nor will it ever, for the simple fact that it is a compound of individuals who, even as you and I, never even approach their maximum optimum. Nevertheless, we must be sensible to the probability that the university is here to stay for a long, long time in all its many manifestations and relationships. Thus far, the university has been receiving much emolument from the deeply entrenched, well-heeled, and highly organized bulwarks of materialism. This indebtedness of the university to materialism was inevitable, It is an organic part of the development of that dangerous imbalance between materialism and humanism which weakens our society. Materialism has already preempted the rights and privileges of humanism, and humanism is a cornerstone of education. Humanism is the conscience and spirit and voice of the people, all the people, without which there can be no university. In the not-too-distant future, the university must declare itself for the rights and privileges of humanism, the people's platform, the voice of the future, total society for total man. The march of economic necessity will force the issue, as it always has and always does and always will. A more balanced society is inevitable. All people must become more important to all people than property has now become to property people. Ironically, it will be the vested interest of materialism which depend on the university to bring about the balance with authority and dispatch. The initial step has already been made. The university is being called upon to meet the social crises of idle hours released by automation. And who in the university complex can better serve humanity in the restless bewilderment of idleness than the creators of philosophy, literature, drama, the dance, and music? Who can better understand and communicate the dramatic urgency of their needs and the profound pleasure, joy, happiness, and gratification for their release into the humanistic awareness of the fine arts? I should say something here about the patronage of the fine arts, the humanities. I should say that at one time, not so far back in history, the fine arts were supported by two very powerful patrons, the church and the feudal courts. After the fall of feudalism and the Industrial Revolution, all the arts lost that patronage. And for quite a long time, generation upon generation, we've had no patronage. The university education will probably, in the democratic system, be the next great patron. In a socialistic system, of course, you are aware that the great patron is the government. It would be interesting, we don't have time, but I just want to sow the thought in your mind. It would be interesting, for instance, to trace the development of pressure groups from the beginning of the church, for instance, which was the greatest mother of the arts for a long, long time, to the present time when the two great pressure groups are the socialist governments and Madison Avenue of America. Now, the university is coming into this position as a great patron. The situation is such that it has to come into it, or we have to not only tacitly but honestly and candidly say that, well, we don't want the fine arts. We don't have time for the fine arts. We only want music and painting and June moon tunes of poetry and the whole business which goes with selling cigarettes and all the soaps and things which make life so sweet and lovely. We have to come to a point where we're going to say, do our people have something which is powerful and strong to say in painting, in sculpture, in literature, in the theater, in the dance, in music? Do we have it? In philosophy? Do we have it? Then let's do something about it. Let's do as much about it as we can. And this we know cannot come from organized corporations of business because there isn't any money in the fine arts. The fine arts never make money until they have been canonized by generations of use. In the beginning, the best art is generally rejected because it's not a rehash or reevaluation, if you want to say it, a rearrangement of other people's ideas which have already been used. This is not creative art. Creative art is projection of something which was not there. A projection of a culture, a projection of an idea, an image, which represents mankind. That's the value of the creative artist. He has these antennae which catches all these things which are around us, and he's able not only to catch them, but also to put them into art forms which people can understand, and to examine them and change them all the time. Another thing which is so important about the creative artist is that the arts have to do two things. They have to confirm tradition, and they have to do it in such a way that they have variation in that confirmation. And that variation is something which comes out of the time period of the artist who creates it. That is the essence of the creative artist's importance to society, that he confirms the highest best which his predecessors left, but he does in no way try to destroy it. He only tries to add something to it by putting the mark of his time period on it in a new kind of variation. So this is the big problem, this problem of the patron of the fine arts. Now, I have other things I want to say here, but I see that the time is getting away, and I've been asked to say something about our scholarship and creativity compatible. I'll stick this in as a kind of a little marginal idea, and then we'll go on with the main idea. At the end, I would like to have a few minutes to say something about how the creative artist is going to get along on the campus. Our scholarship and creativity compatible. The scholar and creative artist are like the owl and the eagle. They are mutually exclusive. Neither needs the other nor encroaches upon the other. Both are apt to regard the other as a necessary nuisance with obvious shortcomings. The creative artist is apt to think of the scholar of his field as an art historian, primarily concerned with cataloging. The scholar is apt to regard the university creative artist as an appendage to culture until time has determined whether or not he was a significant factor in the total texture of society. If so, he is no longer local and therefore must be carefully examined and cataloged. The scholar generally knows more than he can do. The creative artist can do more than he knows, and both of them are willing to leave it that way. The scholar and creative artist must be compatible as two stars in a play, two prima donnas in an opera, two lions in a cage, the sun, moon, and stars in their orbits. Compatibility is a way of life for those who depend on it. And certainly the scholar and creative artist have little enough reason to destroy each other. Fortunately, there is no such a monster as a pure creative artist or scholar. A pure creative artist would have to be protected from society, and vice versa. A pure scholar would probably have to be intravenously fed with the sap from a yo-yo tree. And clothed with the cobwebs of speculation. The creative artist must come down to earth quite often, and the scholar must come up for air. But whether the creative artist can survive in the university is problematic. The university is no longer a cloister for the elite in search of knowledge. It is a busy city planned for clamorous hunters in search of identities, positions and jobs, sheepskins, husbands and wives, almost anything which might improve their status in the maelstrom of life, even knowledge. The busy administrators of such a big operation have little time and less stomach for the eccentricities of the creative artist, who is too far removed from the daily exigencies of academic realities. Such daily problems as faculty, student body, curriculum, campus policies and politics, time schedules, budgets and properties, and the constantly shifting demands of civil liberty abuses and rights of all concerned. Yet it is difficult to imagine how the university could dispense with the contributions of the creative artist in the field of the humanities. It would be like the field of science without the research scientist, philosophy without thinkers, hospitals without practitioners, sports without players. Conceivably, the university might offer history courses about the arts, sciences, medicine, surgery, and sports, planned for the well-rounded man who knew very little about very much, at least the names and dates of categories. I want to say something about, this is a personal conviction, about the nature of the well-rounded man. Knowledge can be likened to a great globe, and you have to go to the center of it from some place to understand it. Otherwise, you just crawl around it all your life trying to find out something. You're on the outside looking in all the time. You never get to the center of anything. The well-rounded man is, he's a pitiful figure because he doesn't exist. There isn't such a thing as a well-rounded man. There used to be a time long, long ago when a man could be a savant. He knew about everything about all that had been discovered. That time has long, long passed. The time when a man can know very much about many things has passed. As a matter of fact, we have become a people of specialists, and we can't avoid it. I am minded, I used to be in Princeton, I'm minded of the great scientist who was there, who loved to play the violin. And his greatest contribution to the world was in the realm of mathematics. But he couldn't count. So that when it came time to play, they let him rehearse with the university orchestra, but when it came time to give a concert, they asked him to swell the audience and let his great and noble head be seen, but not on the stage. Now this sort of thing is a thing that we have to live with. It is something which is part of the basic problem of the university, what it's going to do about taking care of the creative artists. The university has shown very well in 3 categories that it can do it if it wants to. The university has accommodated itself very well to the sports boys. It arranges that they don't have to take such a stiff curriculum because their stiffness is in their muscles. I mean, it's in their muscles later on, but they have to have this power of action. And this is a skill. It's not only thinking, it becomes instinctual. The great athletes are instinctual in their movements. They are wonderful in a way because they are a confirmation that modern man has not lost his power. In fact, he's breaking records all the time. So we need to worry about if we eat too many chalk malls and not enough roast beef, because we've got somebody there that shows us whenever we want to, we can do it. Now, it's important. It's important. It has something to do with our stance as a people, as our civilization. I believe that it's important. The university has made necessary accommodations to these gentlemen. They have given them enough time to work out all their formulas and perfect them. They don't expect them to be great scholars. I would like to say, for instance, that the artist himself is very often not a great scholar. He's not a thinker very often. In fact, one of the first things that a composer has to learn to do is to stop thinking word thoughts, because he obviously can't think in terms of the ebb and flow and the rhythm and the harmonic textures and the orchestration of music if he's thinking word thoughts. You see, the two have nothing to do with each other. One is an architectural thing, which is expanding and contracting all the time, which shot through with rhythms and colors. Doesn't have to do with the logic of word communication or with the traditions of it at all. And I imagine that the painter, I know that I used to go sometimes on sketching trips with a fine painter, and he used to point to a tree and ask me how many greens I could see in that tree. Well, he always saw a great many more than I did, because his eye was trained, and that's part of his business, to enlarge the horizon of the people for whom he painted his pictures, to make a more sentient world, a world which had both larger and smaller, minute values. And when you think of, for instance, the magnificent sculpture of a Rodin, what a magnificent conception he had of the male and the female figure. And when you think of, well, Rembrandt, I saw a whole room of Rembrandts when I was in Leningrad, and I was just amazed at the power of this thing, which just went right out like that and affirmed itself as something which was subjectively beautiful and powerful, and which represented a time period. If that time period could produce a Rembrandt, it must have been a pretty good time period. And that's what the fine arts are about too. They determine the quality of the civilization which produced them also. The individuals that came out of it determine those qualities, and they are all really only sort of representatives of that period and time period. So I feel that the university has to do something. In relation to the artist, I feel that there's no problem about the artist being a good teacher. Generally, he's a very good teacher. He may be a bad teacher for bad students, but for good students, he's a wonderful teacher, because he loves to share the things which he knows. He's not a merchant. It's his desire to get a hold of things and give them out into the world. That's part of him. He'll be a fine student. The problem is not that he wants to be by himself. He has to be by himself. In fact, the university would like to have him by himself all the time if they could. So that's no problem. The one big problem is that the university finds it necessary to be sort of a leader in thought and practices now. The university used to be a sort of an archive where all the great idioms of thought were collected and considered and learned and memorized as part of civilization. Well, the university is not that anymore. The university has changed around altogether. The university is sort of like the old pioneer statement, I used to be behind before, but now I'm first at last. They have taken it upon themselves to try to lead the fine arts. And the only people who can lead the fine arts are the fine artists, not the press, not the mass media. And the time lag has been all upset by the critics, by the mass media, by the press, by the historians. Not so much the historians. Generally, they're a little more cautious. They'll stay back a while before they decide something. But the time lag is something which is very important in the fine arts. It's something which cannot be set aside. The time lag cannot be set aside as it is done, for instance, in new models of automobiles. a new one every year, in which is the mostest of the bestest that ever lived and ever will live for that time period. That kind of advertising has nothing to do with the fine arts, although we're using it. I have friends who are in research medicine. They complain about the same thing. For heaven's sakes, don't let the press get a hold of anything, because by the time they get through with it, everybody will have a completely wrong idea of what we're trying to do, and we'll never be able to do it because they will destroy the whole concept. Now, that happens all the time in research science, I'm told, and it happens also in the fine arts. It doesn't have time to prove itself. The time lag is that people cannot, if it's genuine, digest an idea right away. They have to hear it quite a few times, and they have to hear it with an empathetic attitude. And so the position of the fine arts in the university, and especially the creative artist in relation to the university, is really threatened by the tendency of the university to try to ride on the crest of the wave of publicity. That is the greatest problem, I would say, of the artist, the creative artist, in the sanctum sanctorum of the university. The people want him. Generally, the university will do everything except the necessary. The two things that the creative artist needs, aside from some kind of an economic social support, is great expectation. If you will be a composer in residence on different campuses, you'll be amazed at how you can be there like a lonesome melody, and nobody wants to know what you're doing at all. They're not in the least interested, unless it makes big news. Then all the local papers are after you, and the student papers want something, and suddenly something has happened, and the values have not changed at all. He created these things weeks and weeks and months ago, maybe years ago, but just at this time it's coming out and catapulted into the public mind. This is the big problem of the university, how to recognize the time lag of the creative artist and give him a chance to prove himself. Very often he doesn't prove himself in his own time period. Take a man like Bach, for instance. Bach's own sons thought that the little strange beginnings of the Mannheim period were more important than what their father had produced. And when we look at it in history now, what the father had already produced is probably as important as all the developments of the Mannheim school, even after they got to the Viennese school, which would include Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn. See, there has to be this sense of a time period. I've talked too long now. I want to say a lot of things more. Yeah. The question was, is the artist perhaps better in the conservatory than he is in the university? Well, so far the conservatory has been even more of a colonial institution than the university. Most of the conservatories have spent most of their time producing performers to perform the 18th and 19th century music of Europe. The conservatories have not been very good contributors to a native culture, with one exception, which is the Eastman School of Music, which was based on the very idea that we should have an American school of music.
art or the creative artists in the university?
Well, I wouldn't say so. I think that it's a good retreat. I think every university should have a retreat like that, so that their creative artists could get away over weekends or have a week when the fishing is good, you know, and really go for it. And it should be an established fact now that the Russian government does that sort of thing. They all have retreats near their big cities, and their composers are allowed to go there whenever they want to and be housed and taken care of. I think that the retreat is very important for all the humanities, not only the artists, but the philosophers too, and all the people who are thinking in terms of the humanities. When I say these things, I've not only been speaking about the artists, I've been thinking about the humanities, because you can't have a great civilization without a basic backbone of philosophy. You just can't.
Has the experience of teaching students, presumably somewhat younger than yourself, been a particular stimulus to your own creative activity?
Have you all heard the question? The question was, does teaching stimulate a creative artist, and has it done so in my own case? I would say the good students are an enormous stimulation, and the bad ones are, excuse me for this vulgarism, a pain in the neck. Most of them don't want to learn, number one. And number two, they'll give you an argument about something they don't know anything about, which is an incredible thing. I think in my own case, I certainly would be quite unhappy if I didn't think I was going to have some students to teach, because their eagerness, when you get a good one, how vital they are. They charge your batteries.